The auditorium filled slowly, boots scuffing against the polished floor as soldiers took their seats in loose, careless lines. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flat and unforgiving, washing the room in a pale glare that made every movement feel exposed. At the far end of one row, a single woman sat, already waiting, still and composed, a small medal resting against her chest. It was not the kind of decoration people expected to see here. A few heads turned, twice. Then whispers followed. Low and sharp passed between uniforms like contraband. A smirk flickered. A shoulder leaned in. A quiet laugh escaped and died quickly, as if even the room knew it should not linger. Chairs scraped softly as more soldiers settled in. Someone glanced at the medal again and shook their head, amused, dismissive. Another lifted their eyebrows, exchanging a look that said everything without saying a word. No one spoke loudly enough to be corrected, and that made it worse. She noticed it all. The looks, the judgment, the casual certainty that she did not belong to whatever story that medal represented. Her hands remained folded, her posture unchanged, her face calm in a way that did not invite explanation. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from today. Her name was Elena Ward. She was 38 years old, and on paper her role was easy to overlook. Civilian logistics coordinator assigned to base operations support, the kind of position people rarely asked about and almost never respected. She wore no combat uniform, only a neatly pressed service blouse with a modest badge clipped near the collar, practical shoes polished but unremarkable. That alone explained most of the looks. In a room filled with crisp dress, uniforms and sharp creases, she blended into the background the way support staff always did. Too plain to stand out, too calm to demand attention, too ordinary to match the weight people imagined a medal should carry. Some assumed she was a contractor invited by mistake. Others guessed she handled paperwork or scheduling or supplies that never saw the front edge of danger. She did not correct those assumptions. She never did. Elena sat with her back straight but not rigid, shoulders relaxed in a way that suggested long familiarity with waiting. Her hands rested loosely together in her lap, fingers lightly touching, never fidgeting, never clenched when someone passed too close or paused to stare. She did not flinch or shrink. She simply shifted her gaze to a neutral point ahead, as if she had learned long ago that eye contact could invite questions she had no intention of answering. To anyone watching closely, there was something deliberate about the way she breathed. Slow in, slower out, measured enough to be almost imperceptible. It was not nervous control. It was practice, the kind of rhythm that steadies the body when the mind has already accepted the situation. Each breath seemed to count time, not minutes or seconds exactly, but moments, as if she were marking the space between heartbeats. Others mistook that stillness for uncertainty. They saw quiet and filled it with their own conclusions. A few soldiers leaned back in their seats, whispering behind their hands, glancing at her shoes, her badge, the absence of ribbons on her shoulders. Someone tilted their head, squinting at the medal again, then dismissed it with a soft snort, convinced it must belong to someone else. Elena felt the weight of those glances without turning toward them. She had learned that skill early, learning how to exist under observation without reacting to it. Her spine remained straight but not tense. Her chin stayed level. There was no pride in her posture, no challenge, only balance. When a group nearby laughed quietly, she did not stiffen. When a chair scraped too loudly behind her, she did not startle. She simply adjusted her feet flat on the floor, grounding herself as if reminding her body where it was. Her hands shifted once, thumb pressing briefly against the side of her index finger, then returning to stillness. People read that as timidity. They always did. What they did not see was the discipline behind it. The way she counted her breathing without numbers. The way she measured sound and space instinctively. The way her eyes tracked movement without focusing on faces, cataloging positions rather than expressions. She had learned to stay present without becoming visible, to occupy space without claiming it. Her clothing gave nothing away. No unit patches, no faded insignia, no combat boots worn past their shine, just a clean, unadorned appearance that suggested routine, not risk. It made her easy to dismiss, easy to underestimate, easy to forget. And in this room filled with stories people told about themselves, that invisibility worked against her. Someone a few seats away leaned over and whispered something, glancing toward her medal again. Another person smiled, the kind of smile that carried judgment without malice, assuming there must be an explanation that made sense. Maybe it was a family heirloom. Maybe it was ceremonial. Maybe it was a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quietly later. Elena did not react. Her gaze remained forward, resting on the blank stage at the front of the auditorium. She watched the empty podium the way others watched, crowds, patient and alert. Her breathing stayed even. Her hands stayed calm. If her thoughts stirred, they did not reach her face. She had learned long ago that respect was not something you demanded. It was something you waited for, if it came at all, and if it did not, you carried on anyway. As the room continued to fill, as the murmurs rose and fell around her, Elena Ward remained exactly where she was, still composed, unassuming, and by the time the last seats were taken, the quiet certainty of her presence had done something subtle and dangerous. It had made a few people uncomfortable without them knowing why. By the end of those moments, the audience should not have known her story, but they should have felt it. The auditorium continued to fill row by row, the noise level rising in small, uneven waves. Boots tapped, heels clicked, fabric brushed against fabric. The air grew warmer, thicker as more bodies settled into place. Conversations overlapped and drifted, never loud enough to draw correction, but loud enough to carry. Elena remained where she was, a quiet fixed point, as the room organized itself around her. A pair of non-commissioned officers stopped briefly in the aisle a few rows back. One leaned in toward the other, eyes flicking forward. A grin crossed his face, quick and careless, and he murmured something that ended with a soft chuckle. The other followed his gaze, then lifted his eyebrows, amused. Neither looked embarrassed about being seen. They did not expect to be. A few seats to Elena's left, a younger soldier shifted and whispered to his neighbor, nodding subtly toward her chest. The neighbor tilted his head, squinting as if trying to read fine print from a distance. He shook his head slowly, lips curling at the corner, then leaned back with a sigh that sounded like satisfaction. The message was clear, even without words. The mockery was still restrained, still wrapped in plausibility. Nothing overt, nothing that could be challenged without seeming overly sensitive. That was what made it effective. It lived in glances and half-sentences, in the confidence of people who believed they were safe in their assumptions. Someone laughed a little too loudly near the back. It cut off quickly when a senior figure passed down the aisle, but the latter left a residue behind it. A few others smiled. Some joined in, more out of habit than cruelty. Others looked down at their phones or adjusted their cuffs, suddenly interested in anything but the tension forming nearby. Elena felt the shift without moving. The sound of her own breathing stayed steady even as the room's energy sharpened. She adjusted her posture slightly, settling deeper into the seat, feet planted evenly. It was a small movement, but it grounded her the way it always did when attention turned uncertain. A voice carried from a few rows over, pitched casually, just loud enough to travel. It was framed as humor, the kind people used to test boundaries. Something about ceremonial pieces. Something about medals handed out for attendance. A few people smiled. A few glanced at Elena to see if she reacted. She did not. Her eyes remained forward, unfocused enough to suggest disinterest, alert enough to miss nothing. Her hands stayed folded, fingers resting lightly together. She neither braced nor shrank. She simply existed, allowing the moment to pass through her without resistance. Another soldier leaned across the aisle and murmured a question to someone closer to Elena. The tone was curious, almost polite, but there was an edge to it. He gestured vaguely, not pointing directly, just enough to be understood. The reply came back as a shrug, accompanied by a smirk. No one knew. No one had asked, and somehow that made the assumption stronger. Near the front, a few officers exchanged looks. One of them frowned slightly, not at Elena, but at the behavior around her. He considered saying something, then thought better of it. This was not his place. Not yet. The moment passed and the silence closed back over itself. Elena noticed that too. She always did. The moments when someone almost intervened, then didn't. She did not judge them for it. She understood the weight of hesitation, the cost of standing out. She had lived with it long, enough to recognize it in others. A chair scraped closer this time, someone deliberately choosing a seat one row behind her. As he sat, he leaned forward. Elbows on knees, eyes on the metal again. He cleared his throat, then spoke in a tone that pretended friendliness. "Excuse me," he said softly enough that it sounded harmless. "Is that from a recent ceremony, or older?" It was not a direct accusation. It did not need to be. The question hung in the air between them, framed as curiosity, but sharpened by expectation. A few heads turned slightly, pretending not to listen while listening closely. Elena turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. Her expression was neutral, neither warm nor cold. She met his eyes briefly, long enough to be respectful, not long enough to invite more. "It's older," she said simply. Her voice was calm, steady, without defensiveness. It gave nothing away. The soldier blinked, clearly unsatisfied. He nodded once as if that confirmed something he already believed, and leaned back in his seat. The exchange rippled outward, carried by glances and half smiles. Older. Of course it was. That fit the story they were building. Would you have answered differently in that moment? Would you have explained yourself, or stayed silent like she did? Would silence feel like strength or like surrender? The room continued to settle, but the undercurrent remained. Conversations resumed, but they bent around Elena now, shaped by the quiet certainty that she did not belong to whatever standard the others held. Some soldiers leaned away slightly, as if distance might protect them from association. Others leaned closer, curiosity outweighing caution. A woman 2 rows ahead glanced back over her shoulder, her expression conflicted. She looked at Elena's face, then at the metal, then back again. Her lips parted as if to say something, then closed. She turned forward, shoulders tight, silence again. Elena noticed the woman's discomfort and felt a faint, familiar ache, not anger, not sadness, recognition. She had been on both sides of that hesitation in her life. She knew how heavy it felt to notice an injustice and still remain quiet. Another joke surfaced, this one wrapped in exaggerated politeness. Someone commented on how inclusive ceremonies had become lately. The words were light, but the meaning was not. Few people laughed, others shifted in their seats, pretending not to hear. Elena counted 3 slow breaths, in simul out, in F in out. Her face remained composed, but inside she marked the moment the way she marked all of them. Not to dwell on it later, just to acknowledge it, to remember that it happened, that it mattered, even if no one else seemed to think so. As the start time approached, a senior enlisted leader moved toward the front, checking notes, conferring quietly with an officer. His presence calmed the room slightly, but it did not erase what had already been set in motion. The assumptions were established now, the judgments made. A soldier nearby leaned toward his friend and whispered something that ended with a shrug. The friend nodded, satisfied. Another pair exchanged a look that held a trace of doubt. Now, the first crack in their certainty. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Elena felt the shift before she saw it. The way the room's energy began to change just a fraction. Curiosity crept in where mockery had been, uncertainty where confidence had been. It was not respect, not yet, but it was no longer dismissal alone. Still, no one apologized, no one corrected themselves. The silence remained heavy and complicit. Would you have spoken up if you were sitting nearby? Would you have risked standing out, or would you have stayed seated, telling yourself it was not your place? Elena remained still, her presence unchanged. She did not straighten to appear proud. She did not shrink to appear harmless. She simply waited. Waiting was something she understood well. Waiting without bitterness. Waiting without expectation. The ceremony had not begun, but something else had. A slow, uncomfortable reckoning unfolding quietly in the space between glances and breaths. And as the last few soldiers took their seats, as the doors closed and the room finally stilled, the tension that surrounded Elena Ward was no longer invisible. It was shared, and that made it dangerous. The shift began quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way pressure builds before anyone realizes the air has changed. A door opened near the front of the auditorium, and the low murmur of conversation softened as a senior officer stepped inside. Chairs stopped moving. Voices dropped without instruction. It was not announced, but the room responded anyway. Elena rose with the others. She did not hesitate. She did not look around to see what everyone else was doing. Her movement was immediate and precise, smooth in a way that did not draw attention, but somehow did. Her feet aligned naturally. Her shoulders settled back. Her chin lifted just enough to place her gaze forward and level. A few people noticed. One of the non-commissioned officers from earlier paused, eyes narrowing slightly. He had expected her to lag, to follow half a beat late like civilians often did. Instead, she stood as if the motion had been waiting in her muscles all along. He dismissed the thought almost as soon as it formed, telling himself it meant nothing. Anyone could learn manners on a base. The officer at the front spoke briefly, a routine instruction about seating and timing. It was not a command meant to test anyone, just a formality. Still, Elena responded to the cadence instinctively, settling back into her seat at the exact moment the last word landed. Not early, not late. No glance to either side, no adjustment afterward. Another small thing. Another moment. Someone noticed and then let go. As people resettled, a woman nearby shifted in her chair and leaned closer to her companion. She whispered something, eyes flicking toward Elena's hands. The companion followed her gaze, frowning. Elena's fingers rested lightly against her thigh, now thumb tucked, palm flat. It was a neutral position, easy to overlook, but it carried a discipline that felt practiced rather than casual. They looked away when Elena turned her head slightly, pretending interest in something else. The lights hummed overhead. Papers rustled at the front. The room settled into a fragile quiet. Elena adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. A small movement meant to smooth fabric. For a brief moment, the edge of her wrist was exposed. Just long enough for a thin, pale line to show against her skin before the sleeve fell back into place. It was not dramatic, not fresh, not something that demanded attention, but it was there. The soldier seated behind her noticed it and leaned back, studying the ceiling as if deep in thought. He told himself it could be anything. An accident, old surgery, nothing worth speculating about. Still, his earlier certainty did not return. A name drifted through the air a moment later, spoken softly by someone near the aisle. It was incomplete, half swallowed by movement and distance. Ward maybe, or something that sounded like it. The speaker did not look toward Elena when they said it, and no one responded. The sound disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving behind only the faint sense that it should have meant something. Elena did not react. If she heard it, she gave no sign. Her gaze remained forward, resting on the edge of the stage where the podium stood unused. Her breathing stayed even, slow, measured. In, out, in, out. A junior officer near the front dropped a folder. Papers sliding across the floor. Before anyone else moved, Elena's foot shifted back instinctively, clearing space without looking down, without drawing attention to the motion. It was a subtle adjustment, but it spoke of awareness beyond the obvious. The officer retrieved the papers, muttering a quiet thanks to no one in particular. He did not look at her. He did not need to. The moment passed, but the pattern remained. Someone a few rows over frowned, then shook their head as if annoyed with themselves. They were reading too much into nothing. Everyone was. The room was full of trained people. Habits overlapped, coincidences happened. And yet, when the senior enlisted leader gave a brief hand signal to coordinate timing, Elena acknowledged it with the slightest nod, so small it could be mistaken for nothing at all. But it was the correct response. Automatic, unconscious. A man nearby caught it out of the corner of his eye. His lips parted as if to say something, then closed again. He leaned back, folding his arms, unsettled in a way he could not explain. Elena felt the tension building around her. The way uncertainty replaced mockery in the spaces between breaths. She did not take comfort in it. She did not brace against it. She simply remained where she was, present and contained, letting the weight gather, without pushing back. The wall had not cracked yet. No one had spoken aloud what they were beginning to wonder. No one had admitted that their assumptions no longer fit as cleanly as they had minutes before. But the pressure was there now, unmistakable, and everyone could feel it. The moment arrived without warning, slipping into the ceremony the way small failures often do, not with noise or urgency, but with confusion. A quiet pause stretched at the front of the auditorium as the senior enlisted leader checked his notes again, then glanced toward the officer beside him. They exchanged a look that carried more weight than words. Something was missing. The podium microphone gave a soft pop and then nothing. A technician crouched briefly near the base, adjusted a cable, and stood again with a faint shake of his head. Papers were shuffled. A name on the program did not match the order being followed. The smooth rhythm everyone expected fractured into hesitation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Not loud, not disruptive, but present. Soldiers shifted in their seats. Someone leaned forward, curious, now for a different reason. The ceremony had not started, but it was already slipping. The officer at the front cleared his throat. Buying time, he looked toward the side aisle, then back to the notes in his hand. There was a protocol for this. Everyone knew there was, but no one moved to initiate it. Elena noticed immediately. She did not stiffen. She did not look toward the audience or the officers for permission. She simply rose from her seat and stepped into the aisle, her movements calm and deliberate, as if this were not unexpected at all. A few heads turned instinctively, some in irritation, some in surprise. She walked toward the front without hurrying. Her pace was steady, unassuming, but certain, the kind of walk that suggested purpose without announcement. Couple of soldiers exchanged glances as she passed. One of the non-commissioned officers who had mocked her earlier opened his mouth as if to stop her, then hesitated. Something about her posture made interruption feel inappropriate. He closed his mouth again. At the edge of the stage, Elena paused briefly, not to ask, but to assess. Her eyes moved over the setup, the podium, the microphone cable, the order of documents laid out on the table nearby. In seconds, she understood what had gone wrong. The technician was still there, kneeling, frustration tightening his shoulders. Elena crouched beside him without a word. She reached out, fingers light but confident, and adjusted the connector he had overlooked, pressing it firmly until it seated with a faint, satisfying click. The microphone hummed softly, alive again. No announcement followed. No acknowledgement. Elena stood, nodded once to the technician, and stepped back as if she had never been there. The officer at the front blinked, surprised, then continued where he had left off, voice now carrying clearly through the room. The ceremony resumed, but the room had changed. A few people stared after Elena as she returned to her seat. Others looked at one another. Uncertainty replacing the easy confidence they had worn earlier. That had not been the movement of a civilian unfamiliar with procedure. It had not been the hesitation of someone unsure of their place. It had been efficient, correct, invisible. Elena sat again, hands folding neatly in her lap, her breathing unchanged. If she felt eyes on her now, she gave no sign. She did not look pleased. She did not look vindicated. She looked the same as she had before. The program moved forward for several minutes without incident. Names were read. A brief explanation of the ceremony followed. Then another pause. This one was different. The senior enlisted leader hesitated mid-sentence, scanning the audience. He consulted the officer beside him again, their heads close together, voices too low to hear. A line had been skipped. A recognition section had been reordered incorrectly. The mistake was subtle, but it mattered. Elena felt it before it became obvious. She shifted slightly, her spine straightening a fraction. When the officer began to move on without addressing the missing step, she stood again. This time, the reaction was immediate. A ripple of attention followed her as she stepped forward, not hurried, not apologetic. The non-commissioned officer who had laughed earlier watched her closely now, his expression no longer amused. The soldier behind her leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes narrowed in concentration. Elena approached the side of the stage and spoke quietly to the senior enlisted leader. Her voice did not carry to the audience, but her posture did. She angled her body just enough to indicate the program binder, pointing once, precisely to a section that had been overlooked. The leader followed her gesture. His brow furrowing, he nodded, once sharp and decisive, then turned back to the microphone. Correction. He said calmly. We will proceed with the next recognition as scheduled. No explanation was offered. None was needed. Elena stepped back again, returning to her seat with the same measured pace. The ceremony continued, smoother now, aligned again with its intended order. Whispers stirred, but they were different now. Lower, less certain. A woman 2 rows ahead glanced back at Elena openly this time, her expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. The soldier who had questioned the medal earlier shifted in his seat, eyes lingering on it longer now, his earlier smirk gone. Someone near the aisle leaned toward his friend and murmured something under his breath. The friend nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Elena's profile. Respect had not arrived, not fully. But doubt had taken hold, and doubt was dangerous to certainty. The ceremony moved on, another name, another recognition. Then a final adjustment. This one small but telling. When the senior officer entered again briefly from the side, Elena rose instantly. A fraction of a second before most of the room followed. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to be correct. Several people noticed this time. No one laughed. As she sat again, a non-commissioned officer a few seats away leaned forward, studying her more closely than before. His eyes traced the line of her posture, the calm set of her shoulders, the metal resting against her chest. His certainty slipped further. He looked down at his own uniform, then back at her. Across the aisle another soldier whispered, "That medal," not with mockery now, but with question. His companion did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice held less confidence than before. "I don't know," he said quietly. Elena felt the room, watching her in a new way, not as an object of judgment, but as a variable no one had accounted for. She remained still, her face composed, her attention forward. She did not seek acknowledgement. She did not avoid it. She simply allowed the moment to exist. The officer at the front concluded another segment and moved toward the next. Everything was in order now, the mistakes corrected. The protocol restored, the ceremony steady again, but the air had shifted. The laughter from earlier did not return. The smirks were gone. In their place was something quieter and more unsettling. Curiosity, reassessment, the beginning of respect, unspoken and incomplete. Elena sat exactly as she had at the start, hands folded, eyes forward, breathing slow and even. The metal at her chest caught the light as she shifted slightly, and this time no one dismissed it. They watched it, and for the first time, they wondered what story it truly belonged to. The change did not come with an announcement. It arrived in the voice of a man who had learned not to waste words. The command sergeant major stepped forward near the end of the segment, his presence settling over the room like a held breath. Conversation stopped without instruction. Chairs went still. He scanned the audience once slowly, his eyes moving with purpose rather than curiosity. Then they stopped on Elena. He did not react the way people expected. There was no smile, no surprise that showed on his face, only recognition. "Quiet and absolute, Ms. Ward," he said, his voice calm, but unmistakably deliberate, the sound of her name cut through the room. Elena rose immediately, the motion precise and contained. She did not look startled. She did not look proud. She simply turned to face him, standing at ease without being told. The command sergeant major's posture shifted subtly, straightening by instinct rather than effort. He inclined his head just enough to be respectful. A gesture so small many would have missed it if they were not watching closely. "I see you're wearing it today," he continued, eyes resting briefly on the medal before returning to her face. "Good." That was all he said about it. But the words carried weight. A ripple passed through the room, not sound but understanding. Soldiers who had laughed earlier froze where they sat. Spines straightened. Hands dropped from casual positions to disciplined stillness. Someone in the back exhaled sharply, then caught themselves. The command sergeant major turned to the officer at the podium. "Pros," he said quietly. The ceremony resumed, but it was not the same. No one spoke. No one shifted. The air felt dense, charged with a meaning that had not existed moments before. The medal was no longer an object of speculation. It had been acknowledged by someone who knew exactly what it was without needing to explain it. Elena remained standing for a beat longer than required, then sat, when appropriate, her movements unchanged, if she noticed the way the room watched her. Now she gave no sign. There was no applause, no murmured admiration, just silence. A silence filled with recalibration. Those who had mocked her avoided her gaze. Those who had doubted her looked at the floor. A few faces softened, regret creeping in quietly unannounced. The assumptions that had once felt safe now felt heavy, awkward, impossible to reclaim. The command sergeant major did not look back at her again. He did not need to. His acknowledgement had already done what explanations never could. The room understood, and it stayed silent for a few seconds. Nothing happened. The silence held thick and deliberate, as if the room itself was deciding what came next. No command followed. No instruction was given. The podium remained still, the microphone untouched. And yet something shifted in the space between breaths. One soldier stood. It was not dramatic. He did not move quickly or draw attention to himself. He simply rose from his seat, spine straightening as if guided by instinct rather than thought. His eyes stayed forward, his jaw set, his posture precise. Then another stood and another. Chairs moved softly, not scraping now, but lifting with care. The sound traveled in a wave, front to back, left to right. Soldiers rose in unison, without coordination, without looking to see who else was moving. They stood because it felt wrong to remain seated. Elena felt the change before she saw it. The air behind her shifted, the quiet filling with presence. She did not turn. She did not look back. Her hands remained folded in her lap, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady ahead. The first salute came from the aisle. A clean motion, sharp, undeniable. Then another, then dozens more, arms lifted together. Forearms angled with discipline that could not be mistaken for performance. The room locked into stillness, every salute held with intention. No one rushed. No one hesitated. It was synchronized, not by command but by shared understanding. Faces told the story. Words never could. The non-commissioned officer, who had laughed earlier, stared straight ahead now. His expression tight, eyes fixed, and unblinking. Embarrassment sat heavy in his features, not loud, not defensive, but sincere. He did not lower his salute. Nearby a younger soldier swallowed hard, his brow furrowed, awe replacing the easy certainty he had worn before. He held his posture as if afraid to break it, as if lowering his arm too soon might undo something important. A woman too rose, a head blinked rapidly, her lips pressed together, regret flickering across her face. She stared at Elena's back, shoulders squared, breathing slow, and seemed to understand finally what she had witnessed earlier and chosen not to act on. Elena did not move. She did not rise to acknowledge them. She did not turn to meet their eyes. She did not lift her chin or straighten her shoulders in response. Her stillness was complete, unbroken, as if this moment belonged to them, not to her. The salute held. Time stretched. Not uncomfortably, not awkwardly. It stretched the way meaningful moments do, refusing to be rushed. Somewhere near the back, a soldier's hand trembled slightly before steadying. Another adjusted his stance by a fraction, correcting his posture, without looking down. They were not performing respect. They were practicing it. Elena felt something loosen inside her chest, quiet and unexpected. Not pride, not relief, something softer, something she did not allow herself to examine too closely. She kept her breathing slow, her expression unchanged, trusting that discipline would carry her through the way it always had. The command sergeant major watched the room for a long moment, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. That was enough. One by one, the salutes lowered. Not all at once, not sharply. They fell with care. Hands returning to sides, shoulders relaxing, eyes still forward. The room remained standing, held together by the weight of what had just passed between them. Elena remained seated. If anyone expected a reaction from her, they did not get it. She did not claim the moment. She allowed it to stand on its own, complete without explanation or acknowledgement. And in that restraint, the respect deepened. Nothing more needed to be said. The ceremony ended without spectacle. No lingering applause followed the final words. No one rushed for the exits. People stood, then sat, then stood again as protocol dictated, moving carefully, now as if aware that noise would feel disrespectful after what had just occurred. Elena waited until the room began to empty before she rose. When she did, her movements were the same as they had been all morning, measured, unassuming. She adjusted the strap of her bag over one shoulder, smoothed the front of her blouse, and stepped into the aisle without drawing attention to herself. A few soldiers looked as she passed. Some nodded once, restrained but sincere. Others lowered their eyes, still processing the weight of their earlier judgments. No one stopped her. No one tried to speak, and Elena did not invite it. Outside the auditorium, the bass returned to its ordinary rhythm. Boots crossed concrete. Radios crackled, vehicles idled, and moved on. The world continued exactly as it had before, indifferent to the quiet, reckoning that had just taken place inside. Elena walked toward her office building at an easy pace, her posture relaxed, her gaze forward. She was not followed. She was not escorted. She was not congratulated. That suited her just fine. She returned to her desk and set her bag down. A stack of supply requests waited where she had left them. She reviewed the first one, pen moving steadily across the page, correcting a small discrepancy in numbers without comment. Work resumed. Purpose restored. Nothing about her role had changed. She did not seek recognition for what had happened. She did not recount it later or frame it as a lesson. She simply carried on the way she always had. And yet something had shifted all the same. Because courage is often invisible. It does not announce itself with noise or demand acknowledgement. It exists in restraint and discipline, in the choice to remain steady when the world misjudges you. Respect, too, is rarely immediate. It is earned long before it is given, carried quietly until someone finally learns to see it. Elena had never needed the room to stand for her. She had stood for herself long before that day. Honor does not announce itself. It waits to be recognized. If you stayed with this story to the end, thank you. Stories like this are not about medals or moments in a room. They are about the people who carry their service quietly, who show up every day without asking to be seen, and who hold themselves to a standard even when no one is watching. Across bases, towns, and homes, there are men and women whose courage never makes headlines. They work in silence, they lead with discipline, and they carry the weight of their experiences without demanding recognition. These stories matter because they remind us that strength is not always loud and honor is not always obvious. To every veteran, every service member, and every quiet professional who has ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Your service counts, even when the world forgets to look closely. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran glory. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.